Today's guest is a groundbreaking scholar, a best-selling author, and a powerful storyteller who is reshaping how we understand history, society, and gender. We are so honored to have Dr. Anna Malaika Tubbs. Anna has a remarkable academic foundation. She translates the deep knowledge into stories that are both clear and deeply engaging. Anna is a two-time New York Times best-selling author. Her first book, The Three Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation, became an instant bestseller and was a New York Times editor's choice. She followed that with her equally acclaimed book, released this year, Erased: What American Patriarchy Has Hidden from Us. Her storytelling also takes the form of her viral TED Talk, How Moms Shape the World, which has been viewed millions of times and powerfully addresses the historical erasure of mothers, especially Black mothers, from our narratives. Her expertise and advocacy have been widely celebrated and featured, and she serves on the board of directors for the Women's Foundation of California. Welcome to Vinyl to Viral, Dr. Anna Malaika Tubbs.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. You're trying to make me cry from the beginning. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction.
You've done some things, my friend. You have done some things. That might be, the biggest and best intro that we'll have of anybody that we coming on our show. Those accolades, I really got to tip my hat to you, and it's an honor to be able to call you friend as well.
Thank you, friends. Thank you so much. It really is my honor to be here. I'm so excited for this convo.
Okay, well, let's get into it. We really are here to talk about your latest bestseller, right? Which it seemed like as soon as you put it up, it became New York Times bestseller, which, definitely speaks to your work, but also speaks to what everyone already knows about you and what we've just been waiting for. But I just got to start by saying, this is the best audited course that I've ever taken in my life, right? Like reading this book, and shout out to Northwestern, because I would say before that was this anthropology class that I took as an engineering student there. But this took the cake. I was like, everyone should read this book. Everyone should take this course. You need to take this on the road. I don't know what you do from here, how you take this and put it into different form and formats, but I'm really looking forward to the future because this is you're now one of my favorite professors ever.
I don't know why y'all are trying to make me so emotional. I didn't know that's what I signed up for.
No. But we truly had the pleasure of attending your book signing here in New York City right after you blessed the view. And you mentioned during that session how you wrote this as a bit of cliff notes for those who are desiring to have this conversation on how America has become what it has today, a place where a man gets reelected as president after almost getting his vice president killed. And I think actually you said something to the effect of, if you want to talk to me about this, here, read this first. And I'll flash the book real quick. And what I really wanted to know from that point is, why did you choose to do the work for others?
I love that question. I feel, we're all part of a larger team. Those of us who want to see more equity in this world, more justice in this world, more ability for people to just be treated as human beings. We're a huge team in that we all have different roles to play. And my role, I feel like at least one of my roles is to be a communicator and a storyteller who brings people together in conversation, who takes things that seem really complicated and seem really divisive and instead makes them simple, brings them down to the more basic form of what we're talking about and how these things were built, and that they don't have to be so complicated, and they also don't have to divide us. When we focus on systems and we focus on the foundation of what we're still experiencing today, you realize that when we're blaming each other or we're fighting against each other, that actually that is a part of the system operating the way it was designed to. And so I think I've just been given a lot of clarity. I believe in God. I feel like one of the callings that God gave me is to see things very clearly and hopefully help more people see it that way, and to celebrate each other and each other's differences. And so it's an honor for me to do that kind of work. It was an honor for me to do that with my first book, even though I often feel as though somebody else should have thought of these things before me. Those are the moments whenever I have an idea and I think, does this already exist? Has somebody already done this? And they haven't. I realized, okay, it's because I'm supposed to do that. I feel like every idea comes to me for a reason. And it's not just so that I can acknowledge the idea and think, okay, cool, that would be great. I'm the kind of person that if the idea is put in my brain, is on my heart, it feels I'm called to do this immediately, and I almost can't relax until I do it. And this book in particular felt very ambitious. It felt very large. And I told a few different people I wanted to write it, and some people actually thought, no, this is too big of an idea, and I'm not going to say who. But people on my team who thought, I don't think that should be your next project. That feels just like too much. And then I thought, but I still feel like I'm supposed to do this. And so I just kept trying, and I kept moving forward with the idea, and it felt like it would come together the way it was supposed to. So that's my long answer, but it just feels like I'm supposed to do it.
Wow. You pull out a lot of things, but to think that there were people that discouraged you or gave you flags of maybe this isn't the right time, do you think that was more around like the administration and your safety? Do you think those are where those kind of fears were placed upon you?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely part of it. I think on one hand, I'm very used to people doubting me, and I don't mean to say it as like, here I am to correct the haters or anything like that. But I think that we just make assumptions about people, right? We often think that's too much for you, or I don't know if you can do it, or things like that. That's always been a motivating factor for me, though, is to say, I still think I can do it and still be able to hear myself and hear my intuition and what I feel called to do. And at the same time, I also did hear, as I was writing this book, many different people say, aren't you nervous to write something like that? Are you going to get security when the book comes out? What if they try to target you, this like kind of, they, whoever this they is. And I thought, yeah, I don't feel nervous at all about this, because I just have to speak what's the truth. And not just because I feel this is the truth, but because I've studied these things, because I have these 3 degrees. I'm an expert in these things. I'm just giving you the receipts and the evidence. I'm also not the kind of communicator who's, trying to combat anybody. I will happily do so. I'm also not confrontation averse, but I'm saying, here's what happened. Let's break it down. Let's think about the founding fathers. It's a little difficult, I think, when I communicate for people to then still feel so armed against what I'm saying, because I'm approaching it from, this is how the system was built. This is historically accurate. Here's how other scholars have talked about it. I'm strategic in different people that I'm quoting in the book. And so I think I'm always really prepared for that. So it just doesn't feel like I should be afraid. I also, the final point I'll make about that is that I always feel like I'm carrying on a legacy of the scholars and writers who so deeply inspired me, and who again had such clarity. It didn't feel like they were afraid, because it just felt like they were just saying what they observed. Somebody like James Baldwin, who really had so many reasons to be afraid, not only for being a Black man, but also a queer man. And also he's traveling to different countries, and he just speaks what he sees. And that is something that I think is so powerful, and the thing that writers and storytellers are really called to do is to find the courage and also just say and speak the truth.
In truth, you did speak. I mean, one of the things that we both talked about when reading this book was all of the bars that you dropped, the verbal visuals, the quotables. For me, it kind of felt like I was reading Rakim's rhyme book, the lyrics to all of Beyonce's albums. And the power that just, spoke through your words was something that I really hadn't seen in a bit, right? Especially when we're thinking about something that can feel like a history lesson, right? And so one of the passages that I want to read real quick, just really, kind of was speaking a little bit about Anita Hill, but it was one of those verbal visuals of bars where I just was like, hold on, what am I reading? This is like a novel, right? And you said, in your words, her words traveled on wind, blowing at the base of a kindling fire, enough to build on what others had started before her and to raise a louder alarm. Talk to me a little bit about your writing style. Like what made you be more of a take on James Baldwin than some of the other, folks that we see that become more of a professor, right? Really, it feeling like you gotta use 5, 6 syllable words, but you've just brought it down in a way that it read so effortlessly and allowed us to like get through it quickly. Like, what can you talk a little bit more about your writing style and how it came to be?
Thank you. That is such a beautiful question. I appreciate that so much. I think for me, writing should be enjoyable for your reader. First and foremost, I think, yes, I am a proud nerd. I am an academic. I love research, but I've always really disliked reading work that is so filled with academic jargon, that is truthfully boring to read, that is labor to read. You feel like this is so hard. I have to go back and reread things over and over again. And that's never been for me my purpose. I feel like my writing, I want it to connect with people on an emotional level. And so one of the things that always means so much to me is when people read The Three Mothers or they read Erased and they say it reads like a novel. It reads like I'm following a story and there's characters and I feel emotionally connected to them. Because those are the things that stay with us. It's never really the case that we will read a book and we remember every single word that the person said, or we don't really remember those sentences, but we remember how those sentences made us feel. And those are the things that'll continue on. Those are the things that allow us to feel like we can do the work that book is asking us to do. And that's just how I've always communicated. And so in academic settings, that hasn't always been very supported, I will say. In all three of my pursuits of these degrees, I always had people who said, this is too understandable.
Wow.
This is not academic writing. And I would kind of push back and say, well, will that keep me from getting the degree? Will that keep me from excelling or getting the grade, that I deserve? And they would say, no. But this isn't how academics typically write. And I would say, well, then that's okay. I'm interested in talking to people beyond the academy. Yes, within the academy, but certainly beyond it. And that includes people who might, have a PhD in computer science. I also want them to be able to read my work. It also includes young people. I was a teacher for many years. I taught 8th graders through 12th graders. And I often think about them. Could they pick up this book and enjoy it and understand it? And how much further can our work go when we're more focused on how many people can I connect with? And so I'm always thinking about that. And then, of course, when you study the works of these incredible legends and you're constantly in their worlds and reading the ways in which they use language so powerfully, it's incredibly inspiring to try that out as well. So even with the part titles of the book and the chapter titles, they're written as poems and mini poems. And I just wanted to challenge myself a little bit more this time, and I hope to continue to do that with each subsequent book.
I mean, your efforts are made plain, and you can feel that throughout the writing. I love that you even brought how the titles are poetry in it. I want to talk about this trend called the degree divide amongst voters, because you're talking about academia, you're talking about professors say it's too simple, it's made too plain, right? But I'm going to read this for us. Voter data from sources like PBS and PR indicates a trend where Donald Trump in his elections received greater support among voters without a college degree. And what you have just showed us, right, is that you don't have to have all these 3 degrees and write the thesis. You can just read this book, and it doesn't have 1,000 syllables. It's made plain and it's accessible to all people. And I actually really love that, because you're broadening the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish here together in this teamwork. Yeah,
thank you so much. And that matters so much to me. And I think what we're seeing on a national level and an international level, but to focus in on the US, we are not communicating with each other, and we're making things far too complicated, and it scares a lot of people. And when you can connect with people on that human level and on this, storytelling level of try to put yourself in this person's shoes or try to walk through. A lot of people told me with the Three Mothers, and it was kind of a surprising point of feedback, but a lot of people said that was the first time they fully understood the plight of Black Americans, and particularly Black women. And that sounds really shocking, but when you think about it from the perspective of a mother and her as a little girl before she has children and all of her dreams and all of her aspirations, but that at every turn, this mother is facing challenges. She has to protect her children from all of the attacks that are being waged against them. In these 3 particular cases, the mothers lose their sons before they pass away. So that finally is the thing that for some people, and I'm not saying everybody, I'm not claiming that that's, the impact that the book had, but for some people, they couldn't really understand all the things we've been fighting for until they saw it through the eyes of mothers. And so that is always something I'm really thinking about. How can we allow more people to see each other's humanity? And academic jargon is not the thing that gets us there. And I'm not saying that all academics need to communicate the way I do. I think we all, again, have unique roles to play. It's just not the way that I write, and it doesn't come naturally to me. It's not the way I speak either. And so there's times where I've also realized that, folks don't always know that I have like these 3 degrees, and that doesn't really matter to me. I'm more interested in just communicating with people. But I often surprise people later because I think they're expecting academics to always show up in this sort of elusive way where we are showing how smart we are. And I just don't think that that is necessary. And I really hope that more of us start to focus on public academia rather than how do I ascend an academic ladder.
We definitely appreciate it because, again, it really is a book that I want to pass on to your point, 8th graders, 9th graders, like, I mean, being a prerequisite going into high school, right? And it really did read like we all can walk away with something. We all can understand this. And you speak to the poetry because, again, as I was looking just at the chapters, I was like, this really is an album, right? I've done music production and managed a whole bunch of people and, shout out Wu-Tang, all those chants. But as I kept going through this and I was piecing it apart, I was like, I can just listen to this part one day. I can listen to this part another day. It's connected, and at the same time, it's a standalone. And so when you were writing this, even as I think about each part kind of feeling like a different album, all within the same, same story or same rhyme book, was there one of those albums that you wrote that was harder than the other ones, or one that, you walked away, you put the pen down and was like, yeah, I did it. Like that's the one. Like, did any of those come across like more or less, like one being even more difficult or another just being like, yeah, I want them to say something after this?
Oh, so good. I mean, there's 2 things I want to say about that. First, when I decided I was going to write this book and my editor was like, yes, we want this book. And then when I sat down, felt very overwhelmed immediately because I thought, how am I going to talk about it? American patriarchy is in everything that we do. How am I going to have the go-to book to help people understand this when there's infinite examples that I could pull from? How do I even start this? And so I decided, okay, I'm going to start with thinking about the stages of my life and how I've come to know American patriarchy. And maybe each chapter will just lead me to the next chapter, and I'm going to see how that works. And so, for an example, for those who haven't read it, the first chapter I say, because I always say our stories start with our mothers. And so I start with my mother's story and how, as a little girl, she's in Clarkston, Washington, and she wants to be a lawyer because her dad's a judge, but her dad says that girls don't do that. Okay, so that's just like an example. I won't say the whole thing of the chapter, but I then think, okay, where do I go next? Oh, she's from Clarkston, Washington. How did Clarkston, Washington get its name? Oh, it was from the Lewis and Clark expedition. Oh, I should talk about that. And then I think of the painting of Sacagawea and how she's leading Lewis and Clark, and I start to question that. And so every single mini chapter really does lead me to the next chapter. And when I started to find my flow there, I did feel very like, oh, that was a really cool technique. And I'm glad that it worked out to get me through an entire book. And I felt really excited about that because I haven't really read a book that does it that way and connects so many different ideas, but we are following one train of thought. And then but the part that I think I was just so happy that it's now in existence is the one on motherhood and reproduction, and how even for women who have no desire to have children, how mothering becomes placed on us as an identity in this American patriarchy. And I, having 3 young babies, but also even before I had my kids, really loved honoring mothers and the role of motherhood and the power and the influence of mothers. And I didn't see anywhere where we could just read how it is being controlled. in the United States, how it's being so disrespected, how and why mothers are not getting the supports that they deserve and the honor and the recognition that they deserve. And so I feel like that one has potential to really transform our lives, our decisions, our policy. And in order to fully understand that one, you do need the basis of what comes before it. But if you were to start there, and I think of anybody who maybe, has a newborn at home or is thinking of starting a family, who maybe in the future wants to have kids, or how they want to mentor the young people around them, even if it's not their children, their nieces or nephews, that part shows us from the very beginning how our identities were contained, how we were put into boxes, but very specifically why in the US we are suffering in ways that are not happening in other places. Like maternal mortality is not a thing in other industrialized nations, but in the US, women are dying all the time. And Black women are dying 4 times the amount of white women. And across the board, across race, across class, across educational attainment, women are dying. And that's the beginning of everything else. And so if there were one chapter that I really felt like, oh, finally, I put all my thoughts in one place and I could give this document to a lawmaker or a mother or anybody, any parent, any person, it's that one.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was gonna, when you asked what's your favorite part, your part that sticks to you, for me was a section on motherhood. You take it all the way back and you talk about the fathers of medicine, the father of gynecology, the father of modern medical education. And it makes me think the father of like a woman's body. It's not the mothers of, but historically, like ancestrally, we know that mothers, midwives have been around and helping for centuries. And to think that a woman's body started off as experiments, right? And how far have we actually come? I question that now. And it's a huge chapter. So I wanted to say thank you, one, for writing it. I feel like there's more to be told and written about. And I think this is a great start for people that even want to get an understanding around the fathers of medicine and how that relates to the lack of research for women's and women's bodies. I mean, there's even less around, perimenopause and even after birth, like women later in life. And so there's so much more advocacy and work to be done. This is a great starting point for people that want to learn more. For me, my own personal experience with this, I was actually diagnosed with PCOS a few years ago. And for years prior to that, I was just misdiagnosed, or they would say, you're missing your menstrual cycle. That's normal. And it wasn't until I got paid better, I got a better job. It wasn't until I could afford to find my own doctors and my own OB-GYNs that I could find a physician that would diagnose me for something that I thought I had. I had to do my own research. And so I think a lot of women are finding themselves in the same place. But when we take it back to the infancy of like why it's so hard to just get care, I think you explain it so well.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's a perfect example of what so many of us experience constantly, which is I have a feeling something's wrong and I'm telling you I know something about myself, and constantly being told by people who are in positions of authority, no, everything's fine, or you're just imagining that. We don't know because we haven't really paid to do any research on that. I think of many of my friends who experience endometriosis, for example, and who throughout their girlhoods, they're being told you're just imagining this level of pain, or this is not that big of a deal, and that we're constantly told to just hide it. And that women's suffering and girls' suffering should just be hidden. I mean, there's also conversations around, of course, the suffering of all people being hidden in American patriarchy, and I address those in the book. But while we're on this section, it's especially true for girls and women. And one of the primary reasons I wanted to write this book was so that we stopped feeling like we were imagining something. And I wanted to affirm for everybody, it's not you. You're not doing anything wrong. And you're also not crazy, no matter how many times they tell you. You are noticing something that is true and that is real. And now you know why they've been trying to tell you that it wasn't. or that you weren't getting the support that you needed, or why it wasn't being prioritized, because it's not even prioritized on a national level.
I thought one of the things that I walked away, especially just thinking about the power of women, but then also really seeing that so much still was in the power of men's hands, right? Like there was this one passage, and you wrote this one sentence. It was just strong. It stuck out for me again. Being a man, evolutionary manhood consists of knowing that fulfillment for men does not rely on the suppression of others. And your bar right there. What were you thinking when you wrote that? Like I've never heard of revolutionary manhood, right? I'm like, okay, I'm Women's Foundation of Californians, one guy on here, right? And I'm thinking, all right, am I doing the right things, especially having a young daughter as well and being a girl dad and all of that. But then when I read that, that really stuck with me in a way was that I really had to reimagine all the things that I thought about myself, all of the things that I was continuing to do. So like, what made you write that?
In that one, I am calling on Bell Hooks, the one and only, who in my work and in my life, her writing, her books have guided so much. And so that small kind of summary that I give is after I'm quoting her speaking about revolutionary manhood for Black men in particular, because there is such a conversation when we talk about patriarchy as a whole, where a lot of people become very defensive, especially men, and especially Black men feel the need to say something like, you know, like that has nothing to do with us, or like that no longer exists. There's just a lot of defensiveness. And so I wanted to write kind of a reminder, one, that again, we're focusing on this system that our founding fathers created and built and manufactured. And they wanted to maintain control in their hands because they had just won the Revolutionary War. And they were very concerned that the revolutionary spirit was spreading across the country and that they were going to lose the power that they so desperately wanted. And so they form the system of our nation and the constitution of our nation with that in mind. How do we keep power in our hands, and how do we serve ourselves? And so they define it as they're the ones that get to own land. They're the ones that get to vote. They're the ones that get to enter into business decisions without anyone there to speak for them. We know from the beginning then that they're not including men who are enslaved. They're not including immigrant men. They're not even really including poor white men. And then they're not including women at all, because women aren't even mentioned in the Constitution, even though, like you were referring to, Abigail Adams says in this famous essay or letter to her husband, remember the ladies. And she's saying, do better by us than the monarchy did. And her husband mocks her and says, we know better than to do that. We're actually going to double down. You all aren't even in the Constitution, and you can't vote, and your identities don't matter. The only thing that matters is for you all who are attached to us, powerful men, is to reproduce our power through children. So that's why we're going to control your mothering. And we're also going to say that this thing that is so powerful that we rely on to survive is not that big a deal. It's just what you're supposed to do is reproduce. And of course, we know in that definition, they're leaving out, again, women who are enslaved, they're leaving out indigenous women, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I'm talking about revolutionary manhood, Bell Hooks is reminding her readers that, and it's in her book, We Real Cool, that this was never to serve Black men. This foundation of patriarchy in the United States also excluded them. However, they've been tricked sometimes, not all of them, but they have largely been tricked into reproducing patriarchy in their lives and in their relationships, because they started to believe that in order to be treated as human beings in their nation, they needed to fulfill the role of the men who were in power. And that all of us, in fact, have been fighting for our right to be gendered in the way that the founding fathers defined it. And so we find ourselves protecting this social order. We find ourselves assimilating to this social order. We find ourselves, when we are lacking resources or don't have the things that we need to take care of ourselves or our family, we find ourselves thinking, I'm just not fulfilling my role that the founding fathers laid out for me as well as I should be. I need to man up. I need to, oppress the women in my life. They're the reason that I'm not able to be treated as a man in my nation. And so all of that is a result of American patriarchy. And so Bell Hooks is really reminding us that wasn't for you all from the beginning.
Don't get it
Black
twisted.
men are revolutionary men. You don't just assimilate to American patriarchy. You're not supposed to protect the vision that they had for this nation. You were always a part of a fight against that. And don't be fooled into thinking that you're supposed to be for that. And so I'm taking from her words and I'm applying it to American patriarchy, saying, if we could all remember that it didn't serve us from the beginning, it didn't include us from the beginning, fight it with us. It's not helping you either to blame me for something, right? And so it's just a necessary reminder. And it's really interesting because, of course, whenever I do podcast interviews, we typically just share like a small clip on social media to get people to listen to the whole conversation. But a lot of times there's just a small clip, and I can't tell you the amount of Black men in the comments who are like, oh, what's she talking about? Like, patriarchy doesn't exist anymore and blah, blah, blah. She's so silly. She's so dumb. And I'm like, I stand for Black men. I love Black men. I am saying this has hurt you. And this is not your vision. It should not be. Stop protecting it. Stop defending it. You have a Black woman talking about patriarchy, and I'm saying this is not your doing. Therefore, don't protect it. And your response to that is to protect it, defend it, and come after me.
Like, you're not them, right?
There lies the problem, and there lies the issue.
And I appreciate you talking about the bell hooks, part, because you explaining that section made me even understand more when you start talking about Asada. Like, in that through line that comes through of her, the more that we know, right? The layers of it, then the harder it is for us to not know or understand, right? The more we want to start to peel back that onion. And I don't want to get too much into that because I want the readers, especially since I just said and dropped Assata Shakur. Yes, she drops Assata Shakur. She even used her first government name in the book, y'all. Read this book because it's beyond impressive. Especially if you're a hip hop head and all of that, you're going to end up feeling and seeing some of that as well. But
on the heels of new generations coming forward and how we raise our kids, what advice are you giving to parents with this in mind?
The go-to for this one is June Jordan's words, where she says that every time a child is born, the world begins again. And this is really how Black feminists often see motherhood differently than other scholars. And so it's really about asking your kids, what world is beginning with you? And obviously, like a newborn, you're not sitting there just like expecting a response from them, but the way in which they live their life and what matters to them and what they want to wear and how they want to show up in the world. We're asking them to show us who they are and what world they're bringing to us versus us putting this world that we currently live onto them. Because if we all want change, then why are we reproducing it in the system in our parenting instead of saying, hey, you all are supposed to come tell us about some other world and show us what that is, and we're going to do our best to keep you from being controlled by the world as it already is.
I love that. And doing away with gender reveals.
I know. I've never done them. I never found out until the day our children were born. And also, I always say, people will ask me, like, okay, you have a boy, girl, boy? I'm like, yeah, as far as I know. And at any point, they might tell me differently. That's completely fine. Like, we all have to, like, let it go. Let all of the pressure of this binary go. It doesn't mean that you can't, still identify as a woman yourself. And I say in the book, like, I live a pretty traditional life. I married my college sweetheart. We have 3 kids. We're in a monogamous relationship that might be really boring to other people. And that's who I am. But I just don't think everybody has to be that. And if you can let go of thinking that everybody has to follow what you do, like, you can live your life also, like, relax, breathe. It's going to be fine.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in with one because this one really hit me too.
Okay, how fast does rapid fire need to be? Like, I need to give you, like, this is not my strength.
Give it to me in like 30 seconds. And this one, just
okay.
like, maybe this will be like the feeling. Like, what did you feel even after you wrote this? Because I felt something. But I could not separate the African color from the man, nor prevent that disgust and horror which filled my mind every time I saw him touch the gentle Desdemona. I know those aren't they're not sure words, but what did you feel after even writing and talking about that section?
But also disappointed, but I think it's a reminder. The reason I'm quoting her, and it's funny because we talked about Abigail earlier in this interview as somebody who was, feminist, and she actually was also an abolitionist, but she was also very anti, Black people and white people loving each other, being together. And so when she sees Othello, she's very upset about this particular part of it. And so it's a reminder that people are nuanced, they're complex. I think we want to always go back through history and try to say someone was good or bad. And that's really not how any of us, I think, should be judged. It's a sum of all of the pieces. And so, yes, she was an amazing feminist. She was also racist. We should remember that.
The disgust. What's that word?
What we pride ourselves in our podcast is coming from different generations. What else needs to be written for future generations?
Generally, okay. I would say it is really important as much as possible for us to connect history to the present. Like, that's always what I'm trying to do in any of the topics that I'm covering, because we forget just how connected we are to all of this. So one of the things I'm trying to expose in here is American patriarchy is actually pretty recent development. It's not like ancient. It's not the natural order. It's not divine. So if you can think about the past, you'll better understand what we're seeing right now with President Donald Trump. And so I think for like future generations, any writing that comes out should always be based in context, history, so that we understand the present. It's very difficult to just comment on right now, which is what, like social media is all about. It's what everybody's constantly doing. But as much as possible, how can we remember the thread and the links? Because that's what brings us the clarity.
I like that. Especially, I wore the Nina Chanel USA shirt, and they got our black flag on the back. I have to show that, and shout out my Chicago kid as well. But one of the things, this is not going to be rapid fire. This is us, really kind of pulling this together, because for me, it was very interesting to see how you started it, talking about your mom, and then how you ended it, right? As an engineer and former engineering student, what we learned growing up, especially in school, at Northwestern, was like reverse engineering. And you started to speak a lot to kind of this reverse engineering, like, how do we solve this American patriarchy thing? What they intentionally were doing? Let's go back. Let's be kind, right? Let's care about each other. But it was so interesting to me to see that end being what your parents told you. And so can you speak a little bit about that in terms of how you started and then ending there? And was that one of the points you were trying to make? Like, hey, this starts at home. Like, we could address some of this stuff just right here.
Yeah. So the way I always think about it as a sociologist is that family is our very first society. Whatever we want to bring into our larger society, our national society, if we have these ideals of equity and justice and love and peace, etc., that if you can model that within your mini society, then we can see some of those ripple effects across our macro society. But also that macro society has to give these mini societies what they need to be able to have a chance to achieve justice, equity, love, happiness in their homes, because they don't exist separately of each other. We don't, especially in the US, have a baseline, right, for having access to food, having access to diapers, having access to what we need. So that's the relationship between the macro and the micro. However, for those micro societies, as much as possible, to model their vision of what their country can be, what their world can be, and to think of it with that level of importance. Because in American patriarchy, again, we also are very focused on, capitalism is a tool of American patriarchy, so we're very focused on the outside world. We're very focused on how we show up outside, right? We think of the ways in which we might, talk to our children at home, and then if people see us, we might speak to them a little bit differently, right? I also am guilty of this, right? So I get overstimulated at home, and I have to remind myself constantly of the thing that I believe, which is, if I want my children to feel safety in this and love in this world, it starts right here. If I want them to think that men and women should be treated equally in this nation, it starts with how, at least in our family, where we're in a heteronormative relationship, it starts with how I speak to my husband and how he speaks to me. It starts with how we both address them, right? Is my husband willing to give them as many hugs and kisses as I am? Because men should be able to do that. And it starts with me asking him in front of them, like, oh, how did you feel about that? Oh, were you sad about that? You know, like that they can also have the same level of feelings that I have. And that needs to be really most important, and that we not be so caught up in how much we're showing up outside of our family. You know, like in meetings, we have a lot more decorum. We're able to like regulate ourselves. But then at home, somehow, this is where we're lashing out at each other. So can we kind of shift things into prioritizing our mini societies? And I think that's where we can achieve our healthiest macro society. And those societies all show up very differently. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I live a traditional, like pretty traditional life. It's just kind of what happened. Mike and I met really young. But I also talk in the book about how the nuclear family is not the only mini society. There's a lot of different ways in which families exist. And Michael, for instance, was raised by his mother, his grandma, and his auntie. And that's a beautiful mini society. And they can model the things that they did model the things that they wanted him to engender in this world. And he always talks about how he's become this inspiring visionary and politician and leader because of what he saw when his mother and grandmother and auntie took him to volunteer at a soup kitchen. You know, these are the things that really do matter. And I just think we don't talk about them as a society. And that will really shift how much we value all of those interactions and how we prioritize them.
Thank you. So it sounds like it starts at home. And it starts with the book. So those are great entry points to all of our conversations today, for sure.
Yeah, that's it. That's it for me. What are we missing?
Oh, I thought that was amazing. All of those questions were so beautifully thought out. I loved them. Yeah, I think we covered a lot.
Well, we appreciate you for making the time to join us here on Vinyl to Viral. We know all the generations, not just our generations, but all of our generations are going to be able to connect with this book, and in some ways even deeper than others. And again, I truly, truly, truly appreciate you taking the time. Congratulations again on being a New York Times bestseller. Much success and all the love in the world to you and yours.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for your time. I really appreciate it.